The empty space in my garage looked wrong before my brain even processed what I was seeing. The polished concrete floor still held the faint heat of the late afternoon sun, but the deep metallic red shape that normally sat there, my $250,000 Lamborghini, was gone. I stood in the doorway with my suitcase still in my hand, staring at the blank rectangle of space like it was some kind of optical illusion. Expensive things don't just disappear, especially not from a locked suburban garage in a quiet Colorado neighborhood. Most people might have panicked right then, but panic has never been useful in my line of work. My name is Kayla Richardson. I'm 37 years old, and I coordinate high-value freight transportation for one of the largest logistics companies in the western United States. My entire career revolves around tracking vehicles, preventing asset theft, and figuring out exactly where things went when they vanish. So when I saw that empty garage space where my Lamborghini should have been, the first thought that settled into my mind wasn't confusion. It was something colder and far more certain. Someone had just stolen the wrong car from the wrong woman. The house was quiet when I stepped inside. It was a calm Friday afternoon in the kind of suburban neighborhood where people watered their lawns and waved politely when you drove past. I set my suitcase beside the front door and walked down the hallway toward the garage access again, hoping there might be some simple explanation. Maybe I had left the car at the airport parking structure before flying to Chicago for the 3-day logistics audit. Maybe exhaustion from the trip had scrambled my memory. But when I opened the garage door again and saw the same empty parking space, that small hope evaporated instantly. The Lamborghini Huracan had been the single biggest purchase I had ever made for myself. I didn't inherit it, and no one helped me finance it. I bought it after more than a decade of working in logistics, climbing my way from overnight dispatch shifts into asset coordination roles where the responsibility could involve millions of dollars in freight moving across state lines. The job demanded discipline, patience, and the ability to think clearly when something valuable disappeared. That experience had taught me one simple truth. When a vehicle vanishes, there is always a trail. I scanned the garage carefully. The door locks were intact. The side entry door showed no scratches, no bent hinges, nothing suggesting forced entry. Whoever had taken the car had not broken into the garage. That narrowed the possibilities quickly. Either the car had been moved with the primary key, which I kept with me, or someone had accessed the spare key I stored inside my house. That thought made my stomach tighten slightly. Only a few people even knew the spare key existed. I walked down the hallway to my home office and stopped in the doorway. At first, the room looked exactly the way I had left it before my trip. The desk lamp sat where I had placed it. My laptop charger was coiled neatly beside the monitor, and the framed logistics certification hanging on the wall hadn't moved. But one detail immediately caught my attention. My oak desk drawer was open. Not just open, misaligned. The wood around the lock had splintered outward, and several deep scratches ran across the brass plate where the lock cylinder had been forced. Someone had pried it open with a screwdriver. I stepped closer slowly, already knowing what I was about to find. That drawer held two things connected to the Lamborghini: the spare key fob and the folder containing the vehicle title registered in my name. I pulled the drawer open completely. The title folder was still there. The key was gone. For a moment, I just stood there looking at the empty space where it should have been, feeling a mix of anger and professional curiosity settle in. Whoever had done this hadn't tried to hide it. The damage to the drawer was obvious. It was the kind of careless break-in someone commits when they believe they'll never face consequences. Most people would have called the police immediately. Instead, I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. Working in logistics makes you paranoid in useful ways. Every entrance in my house was covered by a high-definition security camera, including the hallway leading to this office. Within seconds, the camera interface appeared on my screen. I rewound the footage to Thursday afternoon while I was still in Chicago. At exactly 2:12 p.m., the front door opened. The first person who walked inside was my mother, Linda Richardson. She used the emergency key I had given my parents years earlier in case of plumbing emergencies while I traveled for work. Behind her walked my older sister, Vanessa Harrington. Vanessa was smiling. They walked straight down the hallway toward my office like they had every right to be there. I watched in silence as my mother opened her purse and pulled out a flathead screwdriver. Without hesitation, she jammed it into the brass lock of my desk drawer and forced it open. The wood splintered exactly the way it looked in front of me now. She reached inside the drawer, grabbed the Lamborghini key fob, and tossed it casually toward Vanessa. My sister caught it with one hand, then both of them walked out of my house together. 10 seconds later, the driveway camera showed my Lamborghini roaring to life as Vanessa slid into the driver's seat. The engine revved once, and then she drove away with my car. I watched the security footage one more time before reaching for my phone. The video didn't leave much room for interpretation. My mother entered my house using the emergency key I had given her years ago, walked straight into my office, forced open my desk drawer with a screwdriver, and handed the spare Lamborghini key to my sister. Vanessa caught it like someone receiving a gift. Then they both walked out the door while my car engine roared to life in the driveway. When the video ended, I sat there quietly for a moment with my hands resting on the desk. I wasn't shocked. I wasn't confused. What I felt was something colder than that. It was the calm certainty that comes when the facts are already clear. I picked up my phone and dialed my mother's number. She answered on the second ring. "Kayla, you're home early," Linda said brightly, her voice filled with a kind of cheerful energy that instantly told me she had no idea I had already seen the footage. I kept my tone flat. "Where is my Lamborghini, Mom?" There was a pause just long enough for the shift in her breathing to register. Then she sighed heavily, as if I were the one causing a problem. "Oh, don't start being dramatic," she said. "Your sister needed a car this weekend. She's at a resort party with some very successful people. You weren't even home, so we borrowed it." Borrowed. The word sat between us like a bad joke. "You didn't borrow it," I said calmly. "You used the emergency key to enter my house, and you broke open my desk drawer with a screwdriver to take the spare key." My mother scoffed loudly. "Kayla, you make a ridiculous amount of money. It's just a car. Vanessa needed something nice for the weekend. All her friends drive luxury cars. You wouldn't want her showing up looking like she couldn't keep up." I leaned back in my chair and glanced again at the splintered drawer in front of me. "Where exactly is the car right now?" Another short pause followed before she answered. "Cedar Ridge Resort," she said with clear irritation. "It's a private lakeside place where a lot of wealthy families go. Vanessa was invited to a weekend gathering. It's a great opportunity for her to meet the right people." Before I could respond, another voice cut into the call. My father. "Kayla, you need to calm down," Thomas Richardson said in his familiar, authoritative tone. "Your sister is trying to build connections. That's how opportunities happen. Let her enjoy the car for the weekend." I almost laughed at that. The idea that my Lamborghini had suddenly become a networking tool for Vanessa would have been funny if it hadn't involved a $250,000 vehicle taken without permission. "I want the car back in 20 minutes, I said evenly. "Call Vanessa and tell her to drive it home. If the car is not back on my driveway in 20 minutes, I'm reporting it stolen." The reaction was immediate. "You wouldn't dare," my father snapped. "Calling the police on your own family would be disgusting. If you embarrass your sister like that, you can forget about having any relationship with us." My mother jumped in again, her voice sharper now. "Exactly. You're being selfish, Kayla. Families share their wealth. You don't need a Lamborghini sitting in your garage while your sister is trying to build a life. It's basically a family car now." I stared at the paused video frame on my laptop screen where Vanessa had caught the key. A family car. "Tell Vanessa she has 20 minutes, I repeated calmly. My father laughed in disbelief. "She's already out of state," he said. "She drove there this afternoon. You're not going to destroy your sister's future over something this ridiculous." That sentence told me everything. The car wasn't coming back tonight. They had already decided the situation was permanent. In their minds, my property had simply been reassigned to the daughter they always protected. Instead of arguing further, I stood up slowly from my desk and walked to the window overlooking my driveway. The empty concrete space where the Lamborghini should have been looked even more obvious now. "You have exactly 20 minutes, I said quietly. My mother scoffed. "Stop being dramatic. Vanessa will bring it back Sunday." I let the silence stretch for a second. "Is that a promise?" I asked. Neither of them answered immediately. I could almost feel the confusion on the other end of the call. They had expected anger. They had expected shouting. What they didn't expect was calm. "You're unbelievable," my father muttered. I didn't respond. I simply ended the call and placed the phone face down on my desk. Then I sat back down, opened my laptop again, and logged into the asset tracking system I used every day at work. Because while my family believed they had just taken my Lamborghini for a weekend party, they had forgotten one very important detail. I make a living tracking expensive vehicles that people think they can get away with stealing. The Lamborghini's tracking system connected to my laptop within seconds. I had installed the GPS module the same week I bought the car, not because I expected it to be stolen, but because asset tracking had become second nature after years in logistics. Vehicles move, things disappear, and data tells the real story long before people do. The system displayed a simple digital map with a blinking red marker that represented my car. The marker was not in my garage. It was already more than 200 miles away. I zoomed in on the map and watched the route history populate across the screen. The Lamborghini had left my driveway at 2:19 p.m. Thursday afternoon, according to the driveway camera timestamp. From there, it traveled west along Interstate 70 before crossing the state line into Utah. The red marker now sat beside a blue lake icon labeled Cedar Ridge Resort. So my mother hadn't been exaggerating. Vanessa had really driven my Lamborghini across state lines just to impress people at a resort party. I leaned back in my chair and checked the clock on my laptop. 17 minutes had passed since I ended the phone call with my parents. They had exactly 3 minutes left of the 20-minute window I had offered. My phone remained silent. That didn't surprise me. In their world, I was the practical daughter who always adjusted to keep the peace, the one who worked hard and didn't create scenes, the one who could be counted on to tolerate Vanessa's behavior because family comes first. But there was something my parents had never understood about the work I did. In logistics, tolerance doesn't stop theft. Evidence does. When the 20-minute mark passed, I reached for my phone again. This time, I didn't dial my parents. I dialed the Colorado State Patrol dispatch number instead. The woman who answered spoke with the calm professionalism of someone who had taken thousands of calls. "Colorado State Patrol, how may I assist you?" "My name is Kayla Richardson," I said evenly. "I need to report a stolen vehicle that has crossed state lines." Her tone shifted slightly, the way it always does when a routine call becomes something more serious. "What type of vehicle are we talking about?" "A 2023 Lamborghini Huracan," I said. "Value approximately $250,000. There was a short pause on the other end of the line. "I'm going to transfer you to an officer," she said. Within a few seconds, another voice came on the line, deeper and more direct. "Sergeant Mercer speaking." I introduced myself again and began explaining the situation the same way I would explain a logistics incident report. Facts first, emotion last. "My vehicle was removed from my residence yesterday afternoon," I said. "The individual driving it transported it across state lines into Utah without my permission. I have the VIN number, the GPS location, and video footage showing the key being taken from my house." Sergeant Mercer didn't interrupt. When I finished, he asked one simple question. "You're the registered owner of the vehicle?" "Yes," I replied. "It's titled solely in my name." "Do you currently have visual confirmation of where the vehicle is?" "I do," I said. "The GPS system shows it parked at Cedar Ridge Resort outside Park City." Another pause followed. "All right, Ms. Richardson," he said finally. "I'm going to need that VIN number." I read it from the title document sitting on my desk. He typed for several seconds before speaking again. "And you're certain the driver does not have permission to operate the vehicle?" "That's correct." "Do you know the driver's name?" "Yes," I said. "Vanessa Harrington. She's my sister." The word sister hung in the air for a moment. "That complicates things," he said carefully. "Not legally," I replied. "The vehicle was taken without my consent and transported across state lines." Another short silence followed. "You mentioned video footage," he said. "Yes, My home security cameras recorded my mother breaking into my desk drawer with a screwdriver to retrieve the spare key. The typing on the other end of the line stopped. "Breaking into the drawer?" he repeated. "Yes, ma'am," he said slowly. "That changes the situation significantly." I watched the blinking red GPS marker on my laptop screen while he spoke. "Because once a vehicle valued over $250,000 is taken without permission and moved across state lines," Sergeant Mercer continued, "that becomes interstate vehicle theft." "That's what I thought," I said. "All right," he replied. "Here's what we're going to do." He asked me to email the GPS coordinates, the VIN number, and the security footage immediately so they could coordinate with Utah Highway Patrol. Within minutes, the files were sent. I watched the tracking screen quietly as the red marker remained parked at Cedar Ridge Resort. Vanessa probably believed she was the most impressive person in that parking lot right now. She had no idea that the state patrol vehicles were already on their way. The confirmation email from Sergeant Mercer arrived in my inbox 23 minutes after I sent the files. The message was short and professional, confirming that Utah Highway Patrol units had been notified and were coordinating with the GPS location I provided. I leaned back in my chair and watched the tracking screen on my laptop. The blinking red marker representing my Lamborghini had not moved. It remained parked in the lot at Cedar Ridge Resort, right beside the lake. My phone buzzed a few minutes later. Vanessa. I let it ring twice before answering. "What did you do?" she shouted the moment the call connected. Loud music and laughter echoed behind her, the background noise of a crowded party. "There are police cars pulling into the parking lot." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I glanced at the GPS screen again, confirming the car hadn't moved. "Are they near a red Lamborghini?" I asked calmly. Her breathing sharpened instantly. "Yes, that's my car, Kayla. Why are they here?" "No," I said quietly. "It's not your car." For a moment, she said nothing. Then the shouting began again. "Are you insane?" she yelled. "I'm at a private event with investors and entrepreneurs. You just sent the police here?" "You drove a stolen vehicle across state lines," I replied. "I didn't steal anything," Vanessa snapped. "Mom gave me the key. She said you weren't using it and that it was fine. Mom doesn't own the car." The music behind her cut off suddenly as someone nearby lowered the volume. I could hear male voices speaking in the background now, deeper and more controlled. Then another voice came through the phone. "Ma'am," a man said firmly, "step away from the vehicle and keep your hands where we can see them." Vanessa gasped. "What is happening right now?" "That would be the state patrol," I said. She began breathing faster. "Kayla, fix this," she whispered urgently. "Tell them it's a misunderstanding." Before I could respond, another voice spoke clearly through the phone speaker. "Are you Vanessa Harrington?" the officer asked. "Yes," she answered shakily. "Please step away from the Lamborghini and place your hands on the hood." "What? Why?" "Because the vehicle you're driving has been reported stolen and transported across state lines." The words hit her like a physical blow. "That's not possible," Vanessa said quickly. "My sister let me borrow it." I said nothing. The officer spoke again. "Ma'am, the registered owner of this vehicle reported it stolen earlier this evening. We also have confirmation that the vehicle crossed state lines without authorization." Vanessa's voice turned desperate. "Kayla, tell them you gave me permission," she begged into the phone. "Just say it was a misunderstanding." I leaned forward and closed the laptop slightly so the screen light dimmed. "I can't do that," I said. "What do you mean you can't?" "Because I didn't give you permission." The officer must have realized she was still holding the phone. "Ma'am, please place the phone down and keep your hands visible." Vanessa ignored him. "If you don't fix this right now, I swear I will never speak to you again," she hissed. "That's your choice." There was a brief struggle of voices on the other end. Then the phone dropped against something hard, and the audio changed as if it had landed on the pavement. From that angle, I could hear everything. "Ma'am, turn around and place your hands behind your back." "You're making a huge mistake," Vanessa shouted. Metal cuffs clicked shut. Gasps erupted from the crowd around her. I could hear people whispering and the distant sound of cameras as phones came out to record what was happening. The same friends Vanessa had been trying to impress minutes earlier were now watching her get arrested beside a $250,000 car she had claimed was hers. An officer picked up the phone. "Is this Kayla Richardson?" he asked. "Yes. This is Trooper Daniels with Utah Highway Patrol. We've secured the vehicle. Your sister is currently being detained under suspicion of interstate transportation of a stolen vehicle." "Understood. Can you confirm you are the sole registered owner of the Lamborghini?" "Yes." "And you did not authorize her to drive it across state lines?" "That's correct." He paused briefly before speaking again. "All right. We'll coordinate with Colorado authorities and arrange for the vehicle to be impounded until the investigation is complete." "Thank you," I said. He ended the call. The room around me fell silent again, except for the soft hum of my laptop fan. On the screen, the red GPS marker remained parked at Cedar Ridge Resort. The Lamborghini hadn't moved, but the situation for my sister had just changed permanently. The call from Sergeant Mercer ended only after he confirmed every detail about the Lamborghini's registration and asked me to email a copy of the ownership documents. I sent the files immediately from the same folder where I stored all my vehicle records. Within minutes, the confirmation receipt from the Highway Patrol system appeared in my inbox. From that moment forward, the situation was no longer a private argument between family members. It had officially become a criminal case. About 30 minutes later, my phone began vibrating again, this time with a name I already expected to see, Linda Richardson. I answered the call and placed the phone on speaker while I continued watching the GPS telemetry on my laptop. My mother's voice exploded through the line the moment the call connected. "Kayla, what did you do?" she shouted, her calm confidence from earlier completely gone. "Vanessa just called us from a police car. They surrounded her with 4 patrol vehicles and treated her like a criminal in front of everyone at that resort." I leaned back in my chair and let her finish. In the background, I could hear my father pacing across what sounded like the hardwood floor of their living room. My mother's voice trembled with anger and panic. "They forced her to kneel in the parking lot," she continued. "Her friends were watching. Do you realize how humiliating this is for her?" "She was driving a stolen vehicle across state lines," I replied evenly. "That tends to attract attention from law enforcement." The line went silent for a second before my father's voice cut in. "This is insane, Kayla," Thomas said sharply. "You've taken a small family disagreement and turned it into a police matter. Call them back right now and tell them it was a misunderstanding." I turned slightly in my chair and glanced at the damaged desk drawer again. The splintered wood was still visible where my mother had forced the lock open with a screwdriver. "It wasn't a misunderstanding," I said calmly. "Mom broke into my desk drawer to take the spare key. Vanessa drove the car across a state border and told people it was hers. That's not borrowing." My mother gasped loudly. "You're being vindictive," she snapped. "Vanessa just wanted to attend one weekend party without looking poor next to her friends. You could have let her use the car for 2 days. Families share things." "Families also ask permission before taking something worth $250,000, I said. My father tried a different approach. His voice softened slightly, the way it always did when he was trying to regain control of a situation. "Listen," he said carefully. "You know your sister doesn't think about legal details the way you do. She just assumed it was fine because we took the key. Just call the officer and tell them you gave her permission to drive the car. This whole thing will go away." I shook my head even though he couldn't see me. "That's not how it works," I said. "The car was reported stolen. Once the Highway Patrol logged the VIN and confirmed it crossed state lines, the case entered interstate vehicle theft territory. That's federal jurisdiction. I can't simply cancel it." The silence that followed was heavier than anything that had been said so far. My mother spoke again, but her voice sounded very different now. Instead of anger, it carried the edge of real fear. "Kayla, you have to fix this," she said quietly. "Vanessa could end up with a criminal record. Do you understand what that would do to her future?" I looked back at the GPS screen again. The red tracking icon had started moving slowly, indicating the Lamborghini was being transported away from the resort parking lot by officers. "You should have thought about her future before you broke into my desk," I replied. My father exhaled sharply. "You're overreacting," he insisted. "No prosecutor is going to waste time on something this small." "It's a $250,000 vehicle," I said. "And there's video footage of Mom breaking into my house to take the key." The line went completely silent again. After a moment, my mother spoke in a strained whisper. "You wouldn't actually give that video to the police." I opened the folder on my laptop where the security footage was already saved. The file name with the timestamp was sitting there waiting to be attached to an email. "I already did," I said. The reaction on the other end of the call was immediate. My mother began shouting again, but the words were less controlled this time. Panic had replaced her earlier confidence. My father tried to interrupt her, but she kept talking over him, demanding that I call the police and undo the damage before Vanessa was officially booked into custody. I let them argue for a few seconds before speaking again. "The state troopers aren't the only officers involved anymore," I said calmly. "I sent the security footage to the police department in our city as well. The burglary happened here, not at the resort." "What are you talking about?" my father asked. I closed the email window on my laptop and folded my hands on the desk. "I'm talking about Mom breaking into my office and destroying my desk drawer to steal the key," I said. "That part of the crime happened in this jurisdiction." Neither of them spoke. "The local police will want to discuss that with you," I added. Across the line, I heard my mother suddenly stop pacing. Her breathing grew louder as the reality of what I had just said began to sink in. 10 seconds later, my father asked one quiet question. "You already sent the video to the police?" For several seconds after my father asked that question, the only sound coming through the phone was the faint echo of movement inside their house. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I looked down at the confirmation email on my laptop screen, showing that the security footage had already been received by the local police department. The timestamp sat there in plain black letters, quiet proof that the situation had already moved beyond family arguments. "Yes," I said finally. "The footage was submitted about 20 minutes ago." My mother's reaction exploded through the speaker. "Kayla, you can't be serious," she shouted. "You're going to get your own mother arrested over a desk drawer?" "It's not about the drawer," I replied calmly. "It's about breaking into my house and stealing the key to a $250,000 car." My father tried to regain control of the conversation, but his voice carried a tension that hadn't been there earlier. "Kayla, listen carefully," he said. "If the police show up here, we'll explain everything. Your mother had an emergency key. She used it because she thought you wouldn't mind. That's not burglary." I ran my fingers across the splintered wood of the damaged drawer again. "The video shows her forcing open a locked desk with a screwdriver," I said. "That's not an emergency." Neither of them responded immediately. Then a sharp sound cut through the call. A police siren. Not the long-distant wail of an ambulance, but the short, controlled burst officers use when arriving at a residence. My mother inhaled sharply. "Thomas," she whispered urgently, "there are police cars outside." I stayed silent and listened. Through the phone, I could hear the faint rumble of an engine shutting off, followed by the heavy slam of a car door. A moment later came the sound that always carries authority no matter where you hear it. 3 hard knocks on a front door. "Police department," a male voice called out clearly. "Please open the door." My mother's breathing turned frantic. "Kayla, call them back right now," she pleaded. "Tell them there's been a misunderstanding." "I can't do that," I said. Another knock sounded, louder this time. "Ma'am, we know you're inside," the officer said. "Please open the door." My father spoke next, but the confidence in his voice had dropped noticeably. "Linda," he said quietly, "open the door. Arguing will only make this worse." I heard the click of a deadbolt unlocking. The door opened. My father tried to sound composed. "Officers, there must be some mistake," he said politely. "This is a family matter." A second voice answered, calm and direct. "We're here regarding a burglary report connected to a residence belonging to Kayla Richardson. Are Linda Richardson and Thomas Richardson present?" "Yes, I'm Linda," my mother said cautiously. "But this is ridiculous. I didn't burglarize anything. I'm her mother." The officer didn't sound impressed. "Ma'am, We received security footage showing you entering your daughter's residence and forcing open a locked desk drawer using a screwdriver. We need to ask you a few questions." My father attempted to interrupt. "Officer, she had a key to the house. It wasn't a break-in." "That's not the issue," the officer replied. "The issue is the removal of property connected to a stolen vehicle investigation." Silence followed. My mother's voice suddenly rose in panic. "Kayla, tell them I didn't steal anything," she pleaded through the phone. I didn't respond. The officer spoke again, his tone firm now. "Ma'am, based on the evidence we have, you are being detained for questioning regarding residential burglary and property damage." "What?" my mother shouted. The next few seconds were chaotic. My mother protesting loudly, my father arguing in a strained voice, and the officers calmly repeating instructions that carried the weight of authority. "Please turn around and place your hands behind your back." "This is insane," my mother yelled. Metal clicked sharply. Handcuffs. Even through the phone speaker, the sound was unmistakable. I sat quietly in my home office while the noise settled on the other end of the call. After a moment, my father picked up the phone again. His voice sounded very different now. "They're taking your mother to the station," he said quietly. I looked once more at the broken drawer in front of me. "The police are doing their job," I replied. This time my father didn't argue. The months that followed moved slowly at first, then all at once. Legal systems rarely rush, especially when multiple charges are involved and the case crosses state lines. At the beginning, there were interviews, evidence submissions, and statements that had to be recorded carefully. I met with investigators from both Colorado and Utah, answering the same questions in the same calm tone I used every day at work when something valuable went missing inside a logistics network. My role in the investigation was simple. I was the registered owner of the Lamborghini. I had reported the theft. I had provided the GPS data and the surveillance footage showing exactly how the key had been taken from my desk. Everything else unfolded from there. The state investigators requested documentation confirming the vehicle's ownership and value. I sent them the purchase contract showing the $250,000 payment, the title registered in my name, and the insurance policy tied to the vehicle identification number. The GPS logs were also submitted, showing the exact route the Lamborghini traveled from my driveway to Cedar Ridge Resort. The digital trail was clear. The car left my house Thursday afternoon and crossed the state line the same day. Vanessa's legal situation became serious very quickly. Transporting a stolen vehicle across state lines is not treated as a minor offense, especially when the vehicle involved is worth $250,000. Her attorney tried to argue that she believed she had permission to drive the car because our mother gave her the key. But the prosecutor responded by playing the security footage from my home. The courtroom watched silently as the video showed my mother entering my house, walking directly into my office and forcing open the locked drawer with a screwdriver. The moment the wood splintered on screen, the argument that the car had been borrowed began to collapse. Borrowing does not usually involve breaking into locked furniture to retrieve a key. Meanwhile, my mother faced her own legal problems in the local court system. The burglary charge focused entirely on what happened inside my house. The prosecutor explained that while she had once been given an emergency key to enter the home in case of plumbing or electrical problems, that key did not grant permission to damage property or remove items without the owner's consent. The broken desk drawer became a central piece of evidence. Photos of the splintered wood and the damaged brass lock were presented alongside the surveillance footage showing exactly how the damage happened. The timeline was simple and impossible to dispute. My mother forced open the drawer, removed the spare key, and gave it to Vanessa, who then drove the Lamborghini out of the state. My father avoided the same charges, but the investigation still reached him. Phone records and witness statements indicated he knew about the trip to Cedar Ridge Resort before Vanessa left town. Investigators questioned him about whether he had encouraged the plan, though ultimately the prosecutors focused their case on the two people whose actions were directly captured on camera. The hearings themselves were quieter than most people imagine courtrooms to be. There were no dramatic speeches or shouting arguments. Instead, there were documents, video evidence, and a series of questions asked calmly by attorneys and answered under oath. The judge listened carefully while each piece of evidence was presented. When the GPS map showing the Lamborghini's route across the state line appeared on the courtroom monitor, the room fell completely silent. By the end of the hearings, the legal outcomes were clear. Vanessa faced serious penalties tied to interstate vehicle theft, including probation conditions and financial restitution connected to the incident. My mother was held responsible for the burglary and property damage that enabled the theft. The evidence left very little room for alternative explanations. For me, the final step came several weeks later. The Lamborghini had remained inside a secured state impound facility while investigators completed their inspections. When the release paperwork was finally approved, I drove out to the lot on a quiet weekday morning to pick it up. The car looked exactly the same as the day I bought it. The same deep red paint reflecting the sunlight, the same sleek lines that had once caught my attention in the dealership showroom. For a moment, I stood there beside it, remembering how proud I had felt when I first drove it home. Then I unlocked the door, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. This time, the car was going exactly where it belonged. 3 days after the Lamborghini was released from the state impound facility, I drove it slowly back into my garage and shut the door behind me. The same empty space that had greeted me after my business trip was filled again with the deep, metallic red body of the car. For a moment, I stayed in the driver's seat with my hands resting on the steering wheel, listening to the quiet ticking of the engine cooling down. The house around me felt exactly the same as it had months earlier, but something about the silence now felt different. It felt settled. When I first bought the Lamborghini, a lot of people assumed it was just a luxury purchase. Something flashy, something unnecessary. But the car had never really been about showing off. It represented something much simpler and much harder to earn. Independence. Every dollar that paid for that car came from long hours working inside the logistics industry, coordinating fleets, tracking freight routes, and managing risks for vehicles worth far more than most people ever realize are moving across highways every day. My career had taught me one consistent lesson. When valuable assets disappear, emotions don't solve the problem. Systems do, evidence does, accountability does. My parents and my sister had spent years believing that family loyalty meant boundaries didn't apply. Vanessa had always been the daughter who needed support, who needed help, who needed another chance. I was the daughter who had a career, who handled her responsibilities, who didn't complain when things felt unfair. That dynamic worked for a long time because I allowed it to. The moment my mother forced open my desk drawer with a screwdriver, that quiet balance broke. It wasn't about the car anymore. It wasn't even about the money. It was about a line that had finally been crossed so clearly that ignoring it would have meant accepting it forever. The legal consequences that followed weren't something I celebrated. Watching your own family members sit inside a courtroom while prosecutors explain their actions is not the kind of victory anyone dreams about. But there is something strangely clarifying about seeing the truth presented without excuses. Documents, video footage, GPS records. Facts don't bend themselves to family pressure. After everything ended, I changed the locks on my house and upgraded my security system. The emergency key I once trusted my parents with no longer existed. I also filed legal paperwork making it clear that no one else had authority over my property. It wasn't done out of anger. It was done out of practicality. The relationship with my parents and my sister never returned to what it once was. In some ways, that loss still feels heavy. In other ways, it feels like a quiet acceptance of something that had been building for years. Sometimes people ask me whether I regret reporting the Lamborghini stolen. The answer is simple: no. Because when someone believes they can take something you worked years to earn simply because they share your last name, the real issue isn't the object they took. The real issue is the belief that your effort belongs to them. And once that belief exists, the only thing stronger than it is a boundary backed by the truth. That night, after I parked the Lamborghini and walked back inside my house, I turned off the garage lights and looked once more at the space where the car sat safely again. For the first time since this whole situation began, the house felt exactly the way it should: calm, controlled, and mine. Now I'm curious about something. If you had been in my position and your own family secretly took your $250,000 car, told you it was now a family vehicle, and threatened to cut you off if you reported it stolen, what would you have done? Would you have stayed quiet to keep the peace, or would you have done the same thing and let the law handle it? Tell me honestly in the comments, because stories like this always bring out very different opinions. And if you enjoy real-life stories about family boundaries, difficult choices, and the moment when karma finally catches up, make sure you stay here with the channel and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Thank you for listening all the way to the end, and I'll see you in the next one. This narrative is dramatized for storytelling impact.